First of all, jack up the car and also put an axle stand under the car, as safety is a must while working on cars. After you remove the wheel, put it under the sill of the car as another point of protection. The caliper retaining bolts are 14mm, so go ahead and undo the top and bottom bolts. Make sure the front wheels are chocked and then release the handbrake. Then get a large flat screwdriver and lever off the caliper. It may be hard to get off, so take your time. The original pads had some extremely weak springs that inserted into holes in the brake pads. On the new brake pads there was no holes, so were not used on reassembly. The old pads will be stuck in there pretty tight from dirt and corrosion, so you have to lever them out with a screwdriver. The inner pad has a wear indicator attached to it, which will make an audible scraping sound when the pads are low. Make sure to fit this pad to the inboard side. You can remove these metal seats which the brake pads sit in. If you are only changing the pads, then check the sliding pins and re-grease if necessary using the appropriate grease. Do not use copper grease. The sliding boot pulls out quite easy and pushes in easy, but be careful not to rip the rubber boot. If you're only changing the brake pads, then clean up the caliper carrier in situ. If you are changing the disc, then you can clean the carrier caliper up when you take it off. If you are replacing the disc, then you need to take the caliper carrier off. The caliper carrier has two 14mm bolts that you need to remove. The disc retaining screw is usually really tight, so you need some sort of impact tool, otherwise it'll be very difficult to get it off. The old disc will be slightly rusted on, so give it a slight tap with a hammer and it should come free. Give the face where the disc sits a good wire brushing to get rid of any loose rust. After it's been cleaned up, you can give a light smear of copper grease. The new brake discs are covered in a thin film of oil, so you need to clean it off. I used thinners. You can use Terps or brake cleaner. You need to put the new brake carrier metal clips back in, but the ones with this kit would not fit back in and were a poor fit. With the new ones not fitting, I had to clean up the old ones and refit them. The caliper retaining bracket bolts do not use thread lock and have spring washers fitted. You can now put the caliper retaining bracket back on. The Kia Rio uses similar brakes, so you can use this as a guide to torque settings. You can now put the brake pads back in and use a small amount of recommended high temperature grease to the back and top tabs. Copper grease is not recommended. Make sure the handbrake is still released and then wind back in the caliper using the brake winding tool. When the piston is wound in fully, back off the tool ever so slightly so the piston is not wound in too tight. You can now put the caliper back on and tighten the bolts. Use a second spanner to hold the sliding pins in place while you tighten up the bolts. Make sure the disc turns freely, and then that's it, you're done. Just put the wheel back on and you're away. Thanks for watching.